Good morning, all. We do have a quorum, but I think we are still missing two of our subTAC members. What's the pleasure of the subTAC? Do you want to go forth, or do we want to give another minute or two?
Let's give folks a minute or two.
Okay, we will do.
Chair Burke, I did want to let you know I received an email from Ryan Crawford that he would be a few minutes late today.
Great, thank you.
I had a little mini panic attack when I was like, is this in person or virtual?
Because if it's in person, I'm going to be really late.
Yeah. I saw virtual and I'm like, yes.
Yeah,
it's going to be an adjustment. It will be.
We did poll you all to see, and I think we got very few response except from Mary Grace and Mike, but based on the couple of responses, and then we just said, okay, we'll do one more Zoom, but we are following, the new legislation and requirements. And so we'll see how things go for the new year.
Yeah, that was a tough one to respond to because these are certainly convenient, but at the same time, there's a lot more dynamics and networking that happens in person. So it's got pros and cons.
Absolutely. Welcome, Ryan.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, my voice is a little bit out and recovering from a really bad cough.
Hope you're feeling okay.
Non-COVID.
Secretary Manis, did you hear back from Sonoma Water? Did anyone accept?
One moment while I look.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Thompson accepted the meeting invite.
Okay. We'll give one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Our council meetings are going back to in person. I think the first meeting in December. I think Runner Park, you guys have been doing it in person for quite some time.
Yeah, we have been in person since June 15th of last year. When the governor opened the state, we immediately went back to in-person meetings.
Fully in person or hybrid?
Fully.
So you don't give an option? Wow. We've been hybrid since about that time.
Yeah, some of it is, our IT staff really struggled the whole pandemic. So when they didn't have to deal with Zoom meetings anymore, they didn't deal with Zoom meetings anymore.
Yeah, hybrid's going to be even more difficult, even more challenging.
Yep. And what we learned is if you didn't have the right equipment in your council chambers, it was almost impossible.
Yeah.
We've been doing hybrid, like I said, pretty much that whole time. It's worked well. We can do it well for when we're in the council chambers. When we've tried to do hybrid for, WAC TAC meetings, it doesn't work well because it's too big.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I texted Mike, but haven't heard back. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And just a reminder to folks, if you could mute your microphones when you're not speaking, that would be great. If TAC members are able, we ask that you try to remain on camera for the entire meeting, because otherwise it looks like no one's on the meeting. And Secretary Manis, can you do a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. City of Santa Rosa,
Jennifer Burke here.
City of Cotati,
Greg Scott here.
City of Rohnert Park,
Mary Grace Pawson here.
City of Sebastopol,
Ryan Crawford here.
and Sonoma Water. And I do not see that Mr. Thompson has joined the Zoom yet.
Great, thank you. We will now move on to item 2, which is a resolution to allow us to continue to meet virtually due to the continued COVID health pandemic and recommendations still from CDC and local health. We can make findings that meeting in person would present risk and that we would prefer, or we can meet virtually. So that resolution is before the subtac. If anyone would has any questions or comments on that. All right, so before we take a motion, we'll open up for public comment. We're now taking public comment on item 2.1. If you want to make a comment on Zoom, raise your hand. If you're dialing in by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
All right, great. Is there a motion? Yes, Craig.
I did want to have a little bit of discussion on this. Just, it seems like there's a bit of an upsurge and our TAC is pretty well situated to have these virtually. So I wanted to propose approving the resolution to extend it for a little while longer, just to see how this next wave kind of hits everybody. Certainly when we get into the budget, I think it might be the time to have in person, I guess, in the spring when we're getting into the budget. But for this point, I think I'm supportive of continuing the virtual meetings.
Okay. This will allow us to meet virtually for this meeting and for the next 30 days if we need to meet. Our next meeting is not planned until the new year in February. So anyone want to make a motion?
I'll move the resolution. Mary Grace Pawson, City of Rohnert Park.
Great. We have a motion from Rohnert Park.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second from Sebastopol. So as I said, we have a motion from Rohnert Park, a second from Sebastopol, and Secretary Manis, can you do a roll call, please?
Thank you. Sonoma Water, yet to join the meeting. City of Sebastopol,
Aye.
City of Rohnert Park,
Yes.
City of Cotati,
Yes.
City of Santa Rosa.
Jennifer Burke, yes.
Thank you. Let the record show that vote passed with 4 affirmative votes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we will continue this meeting. We'll move on to item 3, which is the minutes approval. Any questions or comments on the minutes before the subtac? If not, we will take public comment before accepting the minutes. So we're taking public comment on item 3.1. If you're on Zoom and would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments.
Okay, so let the record show the minutes have been approved or accepted. We'll move on to item 4, which is public comments for non-agenda items. If you'd like to make a comment on item 4 and you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments.
Great. So that'll take us to our new business. Our first item will be item 5.1, which is a presentation on Santa Rosa's Our Water Future Water Supply Alternatives Plan. And Colin Close, our Senior Water Resources Planner, will be making the presentation.
Good morning. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the slides. And let me get this set up so that it is in the right display mode. There we go. Oh, it looks like I stopped sharing screen. I'm going to try that one more time. I apologize. Let's see. Is that holding this time? Terrific.
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much, Director Burke, and good morning to the subtac. We wanted to update you on this effort, and then our ask is to see if we might be able to have one of you attend and join a stakeholder group that will be working together to provide input on this effort over the next year. So I'll provide a little more information about why we're doing the project, what the project is, and then tell you more about what we're asking. So oops, there we go. So the purpose of this is to increase our water supply resiliency and reliability, in particular in the face of risk of shortages due to emergencies and droughts. We know that it's been about 50 years since we've had a drought this severe, but we also know climate change is here and that we could be seeing this kind of drought more frequently or more severely. The approach is to study a wide range of water supply options and develop a plan for increasing our resiliency over the next 5, 10, or 20 years. So this is a long-range approach to water supply planning. That allows us to take into account studying some water supply options that under typical circumstances we might not find to be very feasible, but looking at this as long-range and reliability improvements make more sense. Here's our water supply portfolio. No surprises to you, I'm sure. We have an entitlement from Sonoma Water that is the largest basis of our water supply. And we have a couple of city wells that produce drinking water. And then we use a little bit of regional recycled water for our urban setting. We did our pilot project starting around 2009 and determined it wasn't really fiscally sound to expand it, but we have maintained those 34 connections with recycled water. So just a little bit of recycled. In 2020 was our third highest use year in the past 12 years. So looking at 2020, 19,387 acre feet, 6.3 billion gallons. And you can see that about 2 out of 3 gallons is residential, about 1 out of 4 is commercial, industrial, institutional with their irrigation. And then the non-revenue, of course, is firefighting, flushing mains, testing hydrants, and then background leaks and main breaks that we fix on our system. And the sources of water, so 93% Sonoma water, 6% wells, about 1% recycled. So again, we're very heavily dependent on one water source. So when Sonoma water has a shortage, we have a shortage. In the past 30 years, this is looking at the two population numbers that are in orange here are 1990 and 2020. That's a 57% increase in population. But the good news is that our community has become much more water efficient. So when I do the gross GPCD, all water use for all purposes divided by population, you can see it's gone down from 177 to 97. That's a 45% decline. And then when we look at residential sales, that's including multifamily and single family and the irrigation associated with those accounts, it's gone from 120 per person per day down to 65. So really good work. Lots of that has been water conservation programs as well as state regulations. And so we're seeing that this trend is wonderful. It's very good. It's solid, but We don't know that we're going to be able to see these kinds of declines going into the future. The indoor is about 40 to 45 gallons per person per day on a 5-year average. So it's going to be tricky to bring this down very quickly from where it is today. All that adds up to a decrease in water consumption long term. So the total amount of water use has gone down. So you can see that there's a steady trend line that decreases, and then across the 20,000 acre foot line, you can see that since 2009, there's only been 2 years where we've been above the 20,000 acre foot line. So pretty steady decline in gross water use, total water use overall. 14% less use in 2020 than 1990, 20% less use than 2004. So all this is to say, we don't think that the problem is going to be average years, normal water supply years. It's really the emergency and drought scenarios that we're trying to address. When we look out to the future, this is from our most recent urban water management plan. We anticipate that there'll be about 30% more people in 2045, more businesses, more landscaping, more institutional uses, et cetera. So there is an increase, but really overall, that 2045 increase is not much over our 2005 water use, again, because we've become so much more efficient over time. So again, we don't think development is what's going to be driving our need for water resiliency. And we think demand hardening is here, as I mentioned before. The gray bars are showing when we've had shortages. That peach was a summer shortage due to infrastructure problems with Sonoma Water's delivery. But you can see with each of these extended droughts, what we see is that the peak water use does not bounce back to what it was pre-drought. So that's good news, but it is demand hardening. It's going to be harder and harder to shave off and meet emergency needs or long-term drought needs simply with conservation. I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is Lake Sonoma's water supply. So we looked at the 30-year average month for October, November, December, and we looked at the lowest month storage and from 1992 to 2020. And then, of course, the 100,000 acre foot line is a bit of a concern to all of us if the lake does go below 100,000 acre feet. And here's how close we came last year, how close we're getting this year. So certainly this is of concern as well in terms of realizing that climate change is here and we're likely to see this kind of more severe drought scenario more frequently than we have in the past, and perhaps more severe. So this is what we're really thinking about in terms of this long-term water supply resiliency effort. If Santa Rosa has a water shortage of 30% or greater, that's when we would be rationing water. The assumption is that Lake Sonoma would be below 100,000 acre feet and probably have a year or less of water supply. And so we would be rationing with our existing customers, and new development would have to achieve a net zero demand. We've got a policy and a practice in place for the water offsets for new development. And on paper, we've got a process and enforcement for water rationing, but we've never had to ration water. And it could have not only implications to our our residential customers, but of course, it could have a dampening effect on the economy as well. So this is something we'd hope to avoid. The gray bar is what we project demand to be as we look out to the future. Stage 5 would be a 30% shortage. So you can see by 2045, that gap is about 7,529 acre feet would be the shortage. So this is the gap that concerns us as we look out to the future during these potentially emergencies or long-term droughts. Our existing capacity, we've got our drinking water wells and a little bit of recycled water. We can meet about almost 8% of our average annual demand with our existing local supplies, and we can come up with about 12.5% of peak day demand with our local supplies, and we'd like to increase the resiliency on both of those. So the initial goal needs to be vetted, needs to be discussed, and we need to look at whether it's sized correctly. But the idea is to reduce the risk of having to ration water and to be able to meet peak demand more fully as we move out to the future. So initially, the goal is 30% of the 2045 5 demand as an annual goal, and then as a daily goal, be able to meet about 40% of our average peak day. These may be too aggressive. They may be too expensive. They may not be actually necessary. We don't know. We need to have deeper discussions about these. And this is, again, where we're looking at bringing in a stakeholder group to help us talk these things through. We have lots of water plans already. All of you probably do as well, but none of them answers that question that we're looking at. How do we reduce the risk of water shortage emergencies and droughts that could cause water rationing and other more difficult impacts on our community? So we're launching this water supply alternatives plan, and the scope of work that we requested when we posted our RFP included engaging a wide range of stakeholders, helping us set those water goals, helping us identify water supply options, establishing criteria and study methods, and then sending off the firm to do the study and develop portfolios, different mixes of water supply options that might make sense for us to achieve our goals. Through a very competitive process, Woodard and Curran came out as the highest ranked, and we've selected Woodard and Curran to work with us on this. And the end goal is to develop a long-term plan for achieving our water supply resiliency goals. So we've already started to work with Woodard and Curran. They're here today. I'll be leaving this meeting after my presentation to join them on a facilities tour, and then they are meeting with our water team for the first time on Monday. So we're already getting started on these initial steps of discussing these goals and options and criteria. Potential sources, this is a short list, kind of condensed list of the options that we've thought about so far. These need to be, again, discussed and vetted and then analyzed to determine whether they are feasible, under what kind of time scale, what kind of funding would be needed, whether these would need to be regional projects that we partner with agencies on. So there's a lot of work yet to be done, but these are some of the sources that we are thinking about at this point in terms of developing a list target for study. The timeline, we've already selected the firm. That's done. That's behind us. We've launched the project. We'll start holding working sessions soon. Again, water team on Monday. We're going to have a community workshop coming up, and then we'll have stakeholder group meetings coming up as well. And then January through June, conduct the study and develop these mixes of options, hold working sessions, refine those as needed, and then draft the plan, and then we'll hold more working sessions and finalize the plan. If you are someone who prefers to see a timeline in this format, this is another way of looking at all of the working sessions that will be occurring along with the key deliverables associated. So again, initially, between now and December, finalizing those goals and supply options for the study, refining the study criteria, what are the weighting factors for each of them, what are the priorities, and the study methods. Then over the next 6 months, initially the first 4 months, Woodard and Curran doing the study and developing portfolios, and then we workshop those and refine those. They draft the plan, we workshop the plan, and it gets refined. And then by October, we end up with a final plan. So that's the schedule before us at this point. So with the water team, that's our key stakeholder group internally, as you might imagine, really drawing on our operational and institutional knowledge and expertise. And so we've got the Director Burke, and then also our deputy directors and key staff from our 5 divisions that include planning, asset management, environmental compliance, local operations, regional operations. We'll be holding 4 community meetings. The first will be October 26th. There will be simultaneous Spanish interpretation. Everyone is invited. This will be on Zoom. So if anyone is interested, they're more than welcome to attend. These will be taped and posted on our webpage, so folks can't attend but do want to see what the public has to say. So this first meeting, we're going to be laying out the basics and asking for public input on the draft goals, supply options, and criteria. The web page for more information is srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. And that's also where folks can get the link for the meeting on October 26th. So this will be the first of 4 meetings that we have with the community to invite their questions and comments and suggestions. And we're here today for you not only to update you about this, but also to ask if you would appoint a representative from the subTAC. The work that would be included is in attending 4 in-person working sessions provided public health is processes or protocols are allowing us to meet in person. These will be 3-hour sessions, and the team is going to be looking at the same thing the water team does in great detail: the goals, the criteria, the potential water supply options, the study methodology. They'll be reviewing draft documents in between meetings. And so we're looking at November 16th, 8:30 to 11:30 in the morning, December 14th, 8:30 to 11:30 in the morning. And then the May and July meetings have yet to be scheduled. So we are very interested in getting input from someone from the subtac to join that. We've got about 20 representatives confirmed so far from a wide range of interests. And so definitely think that we need somebody from subtac to be included. We do have Calpine confirmed to participate, and Doug Beretta is one of our key ag users. He's confirmed. So again, subtac would help us flesh out that regional users representatives in terms of those interests. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to take questions from you. Oops, pardon me. There we go.
Any questions or comments, discussion from subtac members? Mary Grace?
How do you guys see this working with Sonoma Water's resiliency study?
Part of the scope of work is for Woodard and Kern to be tracking that and keeping that in mind. I think that's a big piece of understanding how to look at potential regional projects and also being able to understand, I think, not only the short-term efforts that Sonoma Water's doing to do drought response, adding new wells and that sort of thing, but also the long-term response. So it's a key piece of this. And we're also having a Sonoma Water representative included on the stakeholder group. So we've got Don confirmed, Don Seymour, and he's got an alternate in case he can't attend.
I'm just going to be very blunt here. As part of this, a concern that they're not moving fast enough. Okay.
I would say it is to a degree, but really I think the driving force for Santa Rosa, even if Sonoma Water wasn't doing its resiliency study, really the driving force for us is recognizing that climate change is likely to make these sorts of droughts more frequent. And if we do get into 30% shortage and we're rationing water, that is just has such a long-term impact, not only during the drought, but potentially afterwards to affect housing and business and economy and our own revenues. And so I think, yes, there's a, concern about the resiliency project that's the larger regional project, but I think from my perspective anyway, Mary Grace, the driving piece of it is we need more resiliency for our own sakes to be able to not be so dependent on one source. I don't know, Director Burke, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that's a good summary. I think too, we're cognizant that we're halfway through the contract with Calpine and really starting to look at the future and what does that mean, and how do we want to look at both water supply and discharge reliability, right? So balancing the two. So it seems like the time to really start focusing on that and looking at that planning.
And it looks like...
Sorry, I forgot my job. Craig?
I had the same question that Mary Grace had, because the resiliency study seems to be open-ended, have an open-ended schedule. It's what, year 2 or 3 now, and no end in sight. The dependence on Sonoma Water is astounding, right? It's pretty stark. It's just like 95 or plus %. I guess my question would be, what issues would you see potentially for pushing off the schedule? You've got a December 2023, date for completion of the plan. Is that, hey, we're pretty much looking at institutional controls that we are controls, and so we're pretty independent. We're going to think independently of these other outside forces. So do you see the December being like that's going to be met, or would it
Yeah.
continue to be pushed off because
I don't anticipate it being pushed off, Craig. Thank you for the question. I really don't anticipate it being pushed off. A couple of reasons. We've told them October's it. We want to be done by October. This is a planning and policy document, so we're not going to end up with one path forward. We're going to have an adaptive plan that says, hey, you know, regulations could change, funding could change, technology could change. So we don't want just one path forward. We want a document that empowers us to be able to make policy decisions that can influence our capital projects over the short and the long term. But we need flexibility, and we want this by October. We want to wrap it up. We want to be done. So they're very cognizant. We actually wanted it wrapped up in June, and they, you know, in their presentation to us during the competitive process, they were like, you know, we just don't see it being able to reasonably include all of the input from all the stakeholder groups and be done by June. We recommend October. So we compromised with them on that. But here's the other sort of insider baseball. I'm retiring next year, so this has got to be done before December. I'm motivated.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Any other,
I just have, if I may, one more.
please?
It's intriguing. It's an intriguing invite because there's definitely, this sounds like a think tank. This is going to be, there's a lot of ideas going to be generated by this, and a lot of resources, more so than Cotati individually could provide. And I know Santa Rosa, you know, if you set this up, it looks like to be very thorough, and it could be a very it could be a very, you know, worthwhile process to be involved with this. So when do you need that commitment by?
Well, I'll leave it to the subtac to sort of decide, but the first meeting is November 16th at 8:30 in the morning. So anytime by then will work. You know, and the second date is December 14th at 8:30 in the morning. So we have those two scheduled. And they're going to be in Santa Rosa at one of our, at our utility field office. So we've got everything set up. We've got the infrastructure sort of set up. And they're 3 hours both times, 8:30 to 11:30. So I think anytime before then, unless Director Burke, you have another thought about that.
Well, I think we were hoping today to provide an overview, get if there was one particular subtac member or entity that was interested. I also just want to make sure you all are aware, and Colin and I have discussed this, we will be bringing updates to the subtac at every subtac meeting. So, but we wanted to make sure that there was a voice there from the subtac, because we are one of the major water supply sources in recycled water. So if there's someone that's interested today, we would gladly take that. If you all need a little more time to get back, that's fine too. Mary Grace.
Yeah, Jennifer, we're very interested. I mean, recycled water is 25% of our portfolio. We'd like it to be more. That's a discussion with you to get that to happen. So yeah, we would be very interested in participating.
So would the subtac be comfortable, or would we be okay recommending Mary Grace as being the representative for the subtac? Can I give a poll? Thumbs up, thumbs down? I would be.
Got it. You got an eye right here.
Would you take more than one representative, or?
We've had that question a lot, and we've really tried to limit it to one, because we're trying to keep a pretty manageable stakeholder group. We're already up to what, 21, 22 people as it is. So if you're interested, Craig, we could definitely have you be the alternate for the subtac if Mary Grace can't attend.
Okay.
And I don't know, Director Burke, if we wanted to, we did lose one person, and I'll talk to you about that later. It's not somebody that we were terribly, it's fine that they're not going to, there won't be a representative. But what we perhaps could do is, if Mary Grace were a representative of one of our recycled water users, and then if Craig were the subtac rep, there is, I think, a logic and a reason and a compelling argument for that. So I'll leave it to all of you to decide, but you know, we did one seat is left open at this point, and there's no logical path forward to fill it. So if that were to work for you, Director Burke, I could see us being able to do that if that seemed reasonable and not inappropriate.
Yeah, I'm good with that. As long as we don't have two representing one interest. We're trying to
Yeah,
make-
so Mary Grace, would you be comfortable as representing Roanoke Park's recycled water interest rather than the subtac?
Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah.
Craig, I'm assuming you would be perfectly comfortable representing the subtac. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that works for me if it does for all of you. I do think you're right, Mary Grace. This is a huge part of your portfolio, just as it is for Calpine and just as it is for ag. And so that works for me if it works for everyone.
Okay,
Yeah, and I mean, I think you all know this is not a secret at this point. The Federated Indians of Great Rancheria are planning a major expansion. Their water source is groundwater. They'd like to have recycled water available to them. We, from a regional groundwater standpoint, would like to support that, but you know, that's a large negotiation with a large group of stakeholders about, you know, how we get the right flavor of water to the right use in the right way at the right time.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I think everyone on the subtac is aware we have a strong relationship with Calpine and they have a strong interest. It is a very important piece of our compliance to make sure that we have a weather independent discharge. We have ag customers that would like to see more recycled water use. We have groundwater interests to try and reduce off the groundwater basin. And then quite frankly, at least for Santa Rosa, we have a strong interest in also trying to increase recycled water in some fashion because we are so heavily reliant on Sonoma water. So there are a lot of demands for recycled water, and trying to balance those is really some of the good discussions we want to have through this process. So I'm hearing Craig Scott as the subtac representative, and Mary Grace will also be playing a role as recycled water, but not totally related to the subtac. So we'll have Craig as the subtac rep. Does that work for all? All right.
Yeah.
If no other questions?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Do you have the GSA represented in any way?
We're working on that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
we're working on that. Yeah.
Okay.
But we do have Andy Rogers representing the Russian River Watershed Association. So he is confirmed to participate as a stakeholder. And so, you know, to some degree, he's bringing that. We also have Sonoma RCD, and they're a key player in the GSA as well. So we have some folks who are sort of wearing two hats, if you will, but our actual GSA rep that sort of fell through from the advisory committee, and it's not really clear from the board perspective either. So we're, as Director Burke said, we're still working on that.
Okay. Well, I think you can count on more than one of us to wear multiple hats.
Yeah, really good point. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. And so I'll be getting calendar invites out. And if you're interested in just seeing what we've said to the public so far, again, srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. There's also a couple of recordings in the past meetings section where I presented to the City Council BPU liaison and to the BPU. So they're about 20 minutes or so. So if you wanted to see, you're not going to see a whole lot more than what you've seen today, but there are a couple of recordings up there. So thank you all very much. And with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and join Woodard and Kern if that's okay.
No, wait, hold on. We have to do public comment. So
Oh,
right now
thank you.
we have the recommendation is Craig Scott for Katati. So we'll finalize that after we open for public comment. So we'll now take public comment on item 5.1. If you are on Zoom, please raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, dial *9. And Secretary Manis, any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, great. So with that, thank you very much, Colin, and thank you, Craig, for representing the subtac.
You call him.
And thank you. All right. Great. We will now move on to item 5.2. And item 5.2 is our fiscal year 21-22 financial update. And Nick Harvey, Administrative Analyst for City of Santa Rosa, will be making the presentation.
Thank you, Director Burke, and it'll take me just a second to get my screen set up here. Okay, and are you all seeing that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so as Director Burke mentioned, my name is Nick. I'm an admin analyst on Deputy Director Zunino's team, and I will be giving you an update on the preliminary financial results for the regional enterprise for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. Okay, so on the operations and maintenance side, there's a lot going on here, a lot of variances, but the first thing, and in my mind, the most important thing that I'd point out is the bottom line figures, showing that even though there were significant variances in a couple categories, we still, at the bottom line, came out below budget on our operations and maintenance expenditures. Regarding the two largest variances, the O&M projects, 21 or a 22% variance there. There's several reasons for that. One was the server and computer replacements for the regional operations in the lab. We also invested in some soil remediation on the biosolid land application sites. As you all know, our most significant CIP project at the moment is the UV disinfection system replacement. But in the meantime, a large component of our O&M expenditures is maintaining the system we have and keeping it up and running. So there's a significant investment there. And then the last major item that contributed to that actually ties into the 18 or the 19% variance on the utility side. And that is because our combined heat and power engines, we had a couple down. I believe we still do. We've been investing in parts and maintenance on that to get that system back up and running at full capacity. And that drives the variance in the utilities, because to the extent that those engines aren't online and providing power, we have to then purchase that power from PG&E. So our utilities came in a little higher than expected. Okay, so a few budgeting highlights. As you all know, we're continuing our $1 million per year-over-year increase in the CIP cash funding. Shimmick has begun construction on the UV disinfection replacement project, which is good news because, as you all know, that's been a long time coming. And then a couple other highlights just to show that while, you know, much of our focus as an enterprise is on the treatment infrastructure itself and everything directly involved in treatment, that, you know, we do still have an eye to other elements of the system and are maintaining and investing in them. One example is the Mayacamas pump station roof replacement, to investment in the, that's an investment in the geyser system. And we also completed a roof improvement on a maintenance building at the Laguna treatment plant. Okay, so in spite of our challenging overall rising cost environment, as we all know, inflation has been pretty bad. Costs are always rising. Lately, at least, we're still budgeting effectively. Finance is working. You know, unexpected funds to be distributed by actual flows. Finance is closing out the fiscal year. We'll be hearing the results of that in the coming months. Another good highlight is that we paid off an interfund loan for the purchase of the Walker Avenue property. If you recall, that was a biosolid land application site that we purchased a while back, and we took a loan from Santa Rosa's local wastewater reserves. And so the fact that that's paid off is going to result in about $125,000 per year in savings going forward. So that's good news. And something I already spoke to, we're continuing our proactive investment in O&M project needs at the plant. You know, last year, the year before, we saw some unexpected failures that required increased investment, but now we feel like we're at a place where we stepped up that investment and are doing a much better job at keeping pace with the needs. Okay, looking ahead, as I just spoke to, the finance department's going to be calculating the user agency refunds in the coming months. I've begun the process already for fiscal year 23-24 of speaking with our capital projects engineers and gathering information for capital needs for the next year. We're going to be continuing to monitor progress on the UV disinfection replacement project. There's quite a bit involved there as the bond principal is invested in several different securities. And so we work closely with our financial advisors for cash flow planning so we can liquidate securities in time to pay for invoices and costs related to the project as they come up. So we're leaving the securities in place as long as possible to take advantage of any interest earnings to help offset the net cost of the enterprise. And we'll be doing a lot of work to ensure that we have adequate funding to address upcoming capital needs. A couple other highlights is that a year or two back, you all had expressed some interest in having a regional enterprise specific rate model so that we could plug in figures and see how that would affect your agency's rate models individually. Kimberly and I have been working on that with our rate consultant, and we'll be looking at that in the coming months and hope to share the results of that with you during this year's budget cycle and see how that goes. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions or comments from the subTAC on our budget presentation year end? Craig. And welcome, Mike.
Yeah, I know, Nick, you had mentioned that the individual agency refunds or how we're tracking with the projected reserve balances is being worked out. Is there any kind of indication now? Because I know with Cotati, we were kind of flirting with the negative. We were kind of in the negative and trying to move that positive. Is there anything you can tell us at this point?
We underspent on an O&M on a net basis, but at the same time, the analysis is very complicated and has a lot of nuance to it. So I'm not inclined to speculate on it, unfortunately, but Deputy Director Zunino and I can certainly update you once we hear more from finance.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Jennifer, one real quick one for Nick. Nick, did you say we're up to 8 million a year in pay-as-you-go capital funding?
Yes, and as a reminder, that's 8 million for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. So that was 21-22. We're currently in 22-23, which has 9 million programmed, and we're looking to budget 10 million for 23-24.
And as I recall, and that you may not have this all the top of your head, I always like to compare it to your depreciation. And I don't know if you happen to have that number. I think it was like in the $15 to $20 million range, your annual depreciation.
That figure is actually a little tricky because for financial statement and CAFR, our published CAFR, local and regional enterprises are actually consolidated.
Oh boy!
Actually, for that purpose. So I could work with Deputy Director Zunino. We might be able to get you some ballpark figures, but to get to the level of granularity to say this is definitely the figure attributable to the regional enterprise is a bit tricky, but we can definitely try and get you in the ballpark if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we started with, when we started this, I guess coming up on 10 years ago, that's what's great about having it go up $1 million a year. He gives us a easy way to track it, but really the goal was to make sure to get it to the rate of depreciation, so that otherwise all we're doing every year is borrowing against the depreciation, and if we're not reinvesting, and I guess to that end, if in your spare time, after you've figured out what the depreciation, it'd be interesting to see. And Jennifer, I don't know if you've looked or thought of this, but it's something we do, or I do, where we are, is to look at your combination of your debt service every year. With the debt service, you have funding that's going to pay down debt service, and then we have the $8 or $10 million in capital investments, and then I'm just wondering how that compares to the depreciation. So you can kind of see it's a measure of financially or from an asset standpoint, are we gaining ground or are we losing ground? Does that make sense to you? Or do you understand what I'm?
It does, because theoretically, if we're investing at the same rate of depreciation, where it's a 1-for-1 exchange. I can't speak to that level of specifics. But the other thing I would say is depreciation, while a good benchmark, is strictly a theoretical number. And many times our assets have shorter, longer lives than the depreciation figure. But we can certainly put together some numbers and try to get that out to you if you like.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more on that, because for sometimes we depreciate pipelines over maybe a 50 years, but they may have 100 to 200 year life, and
right.
So get all that, but I just don't know if it's better than nothing, or it's a indicator. I don't think it's
right.
it's the one. It's one of those things you look at. It's like I said, it's just an indicator, and I wouldn't call it a completely quantitative, but it's somewhere between the quantitative and qualitative measure.
Right.
But yeah, if like I said, if you have time at some point if you're done with year end and in all of your spare time, I'm sure you have, I'd be curious to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. One of the things I'll just note, we had kind of looked and we had done an analysis of our infrastructure, both water, sewer, regional, and determined a pretty significant gap in funding. Basically, we are probably under by about half of the investment we should be making every year. We are currently in the process of updating that analysis. So we'll have what we call an updated infrastructure report card for all of our systems, and we'll be bringing that forward in the coming months, and we'll plan to bring an update to the subtac on the regional report card as well. So that provides us some guidance, as well as our master plan and future projects that we're looking at.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad that sounds like really good information.
Any other questions or comments from the subtac? Right, seeing none, we'll now open up for public comment on item 5.2. If you'd like to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nick. And now we will move on to item 5.3, and this will be our Regional Operations Division update. And Deputy Director Water Reuse, Mike Prinz, will be making the presentation.
Okay. I may not be able to switch to the full screen mode, and I don't think I want to.
It's up.
Is it full
Yes.
screen mode? Okay. I can't tell which is up. Good morning, everybody. Mike Prinz, Deputy Director of Regional Water Use Operations. I think I may be a familiar face to a lot of you. Happy to be back, and happy to be back presenting to this Regional Technical Advisory Committee. I've got a number of slides, and we have a limited amount of time remaining, so I'm going to go pretty quickly for the benefit of my colleague, Sean McNeil, who's got a presentation following me. So I will jump right in. Topics that I want to address today are recycled water storage status, allotments of our recycled water as they stand for the calendar year right now, some miscellaneous items that may be of interest to you. I think they will be, an update on capital improvements, and then some items related to biosolids. Firstly, I'd like to introduce sort of virtually via photograph only, our new treatment superintendent, Christian Williams.
Mike?
Yes.
Your slides are not advancing.
Okay.
Are you advancing them?
Yes, I am. So I'm not quite sure how I could change that. Let me try and restart the share. I'm gonna. I have not, I've potentially not gotten all the settings in this computer set up right to run a PowerPoint in full screen mode. So. How is that? Is that showing up? Is Christian showing up?
No. Oh, there you go. Yes.
Okay. Hopefully the slide will advance in this case. Christian Williams is our new treatment superintendent. He's a grade 5 wastewater operator. He's worked at Subregional since 2016. He's not in the Zoom today, but I wanted to introduce him because he actually has a very important role operating the treatment plant here, serving all of you. I'm very pleased to have him on board as a permanent treatment superintendent. Moving forward, I want to give you a recycled water update, a storage update. I'm concerned that the slide may not have advanced. Did it not advance?
It did not.
Okay. I wonder if there's a button I'm not aware of that is going to advance the slides.
If you want to send your PowerPoint to Dina, she may be able to run it for you.
Okay.
It seems like it's looking.
I'll be ready.
Which one is it looking at? Sean is here.
Seems like it's looking at that screen,
Yeah, I'm
your
concerned.
previous screen.
I don't know what's going on.
So
The problem is this PowerPoint's
I
too
would try
large,
from beginning.
to send. It's locked up.
It is.
So tell you what I'm going to do.
If you can send it to me in PDF, I can share it in PDF in advance and you can still have your speaker notes up on your screen, and I'm happy to facilitate in any way you need.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to save it as a PDF right now. It's just a different version than the one I sent to you, Dina. So,
Yeah, I popped up the prior version and realized that I didn't see Christian, so.
right. Apologize for the disruption here. I look forward to meeting in person with you all. So Dina, I just hit send. So you may be able to pull that up.
I'm just waiting for it to come through. One moment.
So in the interim, I can just let you know, storage levels are in the vicinity of 250 million gallons right now, which is right about the average for this time of year. We are setting up for a 90% delivery to Calpine for the year. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Dina. If you could advance to slide 5. Okay, this is a curve I think most of you have seen before. The black line is the now past water year, which finished off at the end of September on the right-hand side. And the new water year is starting on the left-hand side, and that is represented by the red line, which is just currently slightly above our average, which is the gray line. Our operational storage levels are bracketed by the light blue lines, and then some operational targets are represented by the orange and yellow sort of rectilinear lines, I guess you could say, and our maximum storage is the horizontal red line at the top of the chart. Just wanted to give you an update about the overall water year that is now passed and how things are looking right now. We, as I said, are going to be reducing flows to Calpine to, I think, about 11.5 million gallons a day, which will cause the red line to move horizontally with almost no change in storage, maybe a slight increase as we move towards the end of the calendar year. Next slide, Dina, if you don't mind. This is a fairly busy slide, but the point is to give you an update about where we are in terms of allotments for our entire customer base. Agricultural allotments have now totaled 1.25 billion gallons for the year. We started off with a 900 million gallon allotment in January, and we increased that 3 times over the course of this calendar year to bring it to a total of 1.25 billion gallons. Our urban customer base, most substantially Rohnert Park, that allocation for the year is 480 million gallons, which is distributed 450 million for Rohnert Park and 30 million for Santa Rosa. And then, as I mentioned, we're targeting a 90% annual delivery for geysers, which is just over 4 billion gallons. Next slide. Some miscellaneous items of note that you may find of interest. The red circle there is circling Pond A, which I have some other photos of, but I wanted to put it into context. The treatment plant is obviously at the lower right of this aerial photo. And Pond A is not one of our largest ponds, but it is an extension, if you will, of the wet well that the reclamation and geysers pump stations pull from. Next slide, Dina. This is the state of that pond earlier this year, actually not that long ago, I think on the order of a month. It has needed to be maintained for quite a while, and there's quite a bit of bulrush that had filled up the pond and was becoming an operational concern for potentially pulling debris into the wet well for reclamation and geysers. Next slide. This is the state of that pond as it is today. We worked with a specific contractor who had an excavator that had the capability of working inside the limits of a pond like that without sinking into the soft banks, and pretty pleased with the results. Had some other photos which I'm going to skip just because in the interest of time I eliminated those. Moving on to the next slide, if you will, Dina, sorry. We were on standby power burning diesel in our on-site emergency generators at the beginning of September during the very serious heat wave that was impacting the electrical distribution grid across the state. And so per an order issued by the governor, we switched to diesel power. We actually were fully on diesel standby power for a total of 61 hours. At one point, we were running 48 hours continuously on our standby generators, and we are seeking reimbursement for the costs associated with that. I don't have an update about that reimbursement right now, but when I have more information, I will share that with you. Next slide. The Santa Rosa Fire Department actually did a training/tour event at LTP about a month ago. They have a lot of new staff, and they don't normally visit the plant to get an idea of the potential conditions under which they may need to respond to an emergency. So it was actually a few days where we had fire department staff come out. I was amazed at the number of fire trucks that were coming out every day. And I think this photo may represent that pretty well, but I'm very glad that the plant has the attention of the Santa Rosa Fire Department, because there are a number of unique and hard to find locations where emergencies could require them to respond to. So I'm very satisfied that that happened and that it was so well coordinated. Next slide. I want to move into some updates about CIP. Nick mentioned our UV project. It's now underway. There are a number of things that are ongoing daily. A few notable things. We had a triple wide actually trailer that was used for construction management and other purposes that was right in the middle of the footprint, and that's been moved. I think you all have probably seen the temporary flood wall at the plant made of concrete blocks. That is not a long-term solution, but parts of it were in the way of the footprint of the construction site, and that's in the process of being moved. We're working on shifting the temporarily, I should say, the main access to the plant from the south entrance to the middle entrance. So there's some infrastructure adjustments with the gate and some paving that need to happen for that to occur. And there's a number, not too bad, but a number of utility clearances and that need to be established in some relocation within the footprint as well. Very importantly, I was asked to remind you all that you've been invited to the groundbreaking ceremony, which is scheduled for the 26th, roughly 2 weeks from now. And Elise Howard, I should say Elise Miller, is coordinating that, and she's asking for RSVPs. So if you are interested in coming, please communicate with Elise so that she knows how to plan for that. I do hope you all can make it. I understand if you can't, but it is a pretty significant project, worthy of a groundbreaking, I will say. We are moving forward with the Geysers Delta connection. You may have heard about this project previously, where the Geysers pipeline actually runs fairly close to the east end of Delta Pond, and we are connecting that effectively to Delta Pond for potential use of what would otherwise be stranded pump capacity at the pump station just across the street from the plant. Great project, very happy that it's happening. It has a number of benefits with it and ultimately leverages what would otherwise be stranded pump capacity. The discharge, and I have some pictures of some of these coming up, the discharge diffuser also at Delta Pond has had some problems with sediment covering the duckbill diffuser nozzles that are actually at the bottom of Santa Rosa Creek, and have been covered up with some sediment, and we are working on a dredging project to reestablish design capacity for that discharge system. We're upgrading our flare here at the plant. We're upgrading our fueling station here at the plant to include both diesel and unleaded fuel and remediate an underground storage tank issue. And then we've also permanently installed pumps to help with utilization of the West College flow equalization basin, and that is underway as well. Switching to a few photos, next slide. This is an overview of the plant that shows the UV construction project. It's fairly self-explanatory, but the red box symbolizes the new footprint of the active disinfection system. And then there is a diversion pump station, which is a great feature, allows us to take off-spec water should it occur. It does occur occasionally. And the purple pipeline allows us to return it to the top of the plant hydraulic grade line effectively so that we can retreat water. And then there is also a component of that which is a stormwater pump station, which will work in conjunction with our flood protection berm, which is in design right now. Next slide. This is just a way to orient yourself. The plant is at the lower right-hand corner of the aerial, and Delta Pond is at the upper left-hand corner of the aerial, and the blue line symbolizes Highway 12. I'm going to zero in on Delta Pond next, but I want to just sort of give you a visual orientation of where Delta is relative to the plant. Next slide. The red circle highlights the portion of Delta Pond where the diffuser dredging project is going on, and I'll have a photo or two of that coming up. And then the yellow circle shows where the Geysers Delta connection is being made to Delta Pond. Next slide. So on the left is a photograph of the diffuser under construction. You can see the sheet piling at the upper portion of the photograph. That actually is allowing construction to be occurring within the footprint of Santa Rosa Creek at this location. It normally would be submerged under the flow of Santa Rosa Creek. The duckbill check valves have been covered with a fair amount of gravel and sediment, which was not expected to occur. And we have a project going on right now to remove that. The right-hand photo is just an interesting construction shot that was taken during construction of that project before the diffusers, or I should say the nozzles, were attached to the manifold. Next slide. This is a shot that shows more or less the project area. The excavator in the background is immediately adjacent to the south side of Santa Rosa Creek where the work is going on. I have another photo of that in a minute. There were a lot of environmental sensitivities that we had to address in order to do this project. The Capital Improvement Program staff have done a great job getting this project moved forward with all the necessary permitting, including protecting the ground surface using a tracked dump truck, if you will, and some huge custom pallets to prevent the ground from being disrupted by the construction work. On the left-hand side is part of the dewatering system to control sediment in the creek. Next slide. This shows the fairly straightforward process, for the most part, of removing gravel from the diffuser area. The yellow features that you see in the creek are actually the top edges of some sediment curtains to control turbidity downstream of the project. The interior, that controlled zone, has a turbidity of around 300 NTUs, which is pretty high, and they're working very well downstream of this. We only have about 6 NTUs, and we are allowed to go up to as high as 20 NTUs. So the system is working very well, and they are pumping water out of that just to minimize flow downstream, which is further helping the turbidity situation. That water is allowed to infiltrate back into the construction site nearby. Next slide. At the other end of Delta Pond, which, as you can see in this photograph, is basically empty. That's a big body of water, but it's effectively a bird bath within the pond. But you can see the spillway that's under construction in the foreground for the connection of the geysers pipeline to the pond. And that's actually a picture that was taken, I think, about 2 weeks ago. So I think those forms are probably stripped off and the concrete is all poured, and they're working on things outside the footprint of the pond relatively soon. Next slide. This is just another perspective of that spillway. There will be a pretty significant pressure reducing valve that will allow the pressurized flow to be reduced to atmospheric pressure before it enters that spillway. Next slide. I want to touch on a few design efforts of note. We have a pretty significant tertiary filtration system here at the plant. Half of those filter valves and actuators have been replaced, but we need to work on phase 2, which is in design right now. The flood berm, which I mentioned recently, is also in design, and good news, there's been some enhancements to the hazard mitigation grant funding situation, such that we're getting an increase in funding, which we can talk in greater detail about probably at the next subtac. We have property in South County that we use for land application of biosolids. Twin Vista is the name that's given to the property. It's a historical name, I think. There's a levee that protects that property from flooding from Petaluma River, and it needs attention. I've got some photos of that coming up. Llano trunk lining is a very significant project. We have a number of trunk sewers that come to the plant that are definitely showing their age, and there's a significant project to the tune of $12 million to do some significant lining of the Llano trunk. And then we also have a very significant project moving into the design phase for a very widespread electrical upgrade here at the plant, and that is estimated right now to be around $20 million construction value, but it's at the early stages of design, so that's a fairly loose number. We are not moving forward right now with a replacement of our aeration header. from our blower building to our secondary aeration tanks. We had a sinkhole develop associated with a degraded portion of that header, and we replaced it with an above ground steel welded pipe, which is a very robust repair. And in the interest of moving some other high priority projects forward, we're going to rely on that temporary repair for a while, even though it's impacting a lesser used portion of access here at the plant. We can get by and allocate money to other projects instead of moving that forward right now. Next slide. This slide just is a visual representation of the Llano trunk coming into the plant. Plant obviously is at the lower right-hand corner of the aerial. The hotter the colors, I guess you could say, the more concern there is about the condition of the pipe. Up the top of the trunk sewer, which is represented by the multicolored line there is a light blue section. That section is actually right near where Sebastopol ties in to the Llano trunk. And that section was lined, I think, on the order of 20 years ago. So it's probably in the best condition of that entire section of pipe. Also, there's been a lot of lining work done near the treatment plant at the lower right-hand side, which is also represented by the light blue color. But there are a number of sections of this trunk that are a significant concern. Next slide. This is a shot aerial photo of some land application property that the city owns down near Highway 37. The red circle is the Twin Vista property that I mentioned earlier. And I want to zero in on the Petaluma River side of that property on the west there. So next slide. This is a view looking to the north. Zach Kay, our biosolids coordinator, is there on the right-hand side of the photo, pointing at a portion of the levee where there is seepage that is causing the vegetation to still be green at a time of the year when it normally wouldn't be. And obviously the Petaluma River is on the left-hand side. Next photo. And this is an example of sort of the problems that we're seeing with the levee down there. I don't think the levee was really constructed to last as long as it has, and it needs some emergency repairs. And then we have a project in the works to actually improve the levee, and we're targeting sea level rise as an issue we want to address when we determine the crest elevation of that levee. Next slide. Speaking of biosolids, this is just a photograph of some recently hauled biosolids down to South County land application sites. It was just happened to be there when Zach and I went down to look at Twin Vista levee, and thought it might be interesting just to show you what it looks like before it's spread and disked into the ground down there. But that leads me into my final topic, which is a few updates about our biosolids program. Next slide. The regional board, Region 2 regional board, has issued a draft document for changes to mitigation, or I should say monitoring and reporting program requirements for South County land application sites. The same notice was sent to Vallejo and Napa. There's a fair amount of research going on in the arena that the regional board is concerned about, and we've been coordinating with Vallejo on a response to the regional board, which has now been issued. And we basically have asked the regional board to consider deferring any changes to the regulatory requirements for monitoring and reporting. Santa Rosa and Vallejo and Napa comply with federal regulations and have done so for a long time. But we are asking the regional board to slow their process down until the benefit of a significant amount of research comes to fruition in the next 3 to 4 years, so that they can use that research to base any changes to monitoring and reporting requirements on. We are also finally contracting to do a biosolids strategic plan update, and there are a number of issues that are going to be analyzed in that work. What we're going to do with our compost facility ultimately in the long run, what sort of Class A biosolids management processes we might want to consider, and if there are revenue opportunities in the mix that could improve our financial position relative to biosolids, among many other topics, but those are some of note. So with that, I think that's my last slide. Want to see if there are any questions, and I apologize for the somewhat accelerated delivery and hiccup at the beginning of the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions or comments from the subtac? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up to public comment on item 5.3. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via phone, dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment for this item.
Great. Thank you, Mike, for that update on the Regional Operations Division. All right, our next item is item 5.4, and that'll be a presentation on our Environmental Services Division. And Sean McNeil, Deputy Director, Environmental Services, will be making the presentation. Sean.
Great. Thank you, Chair Burke and members of the subtac. I am, let's see, let me get my presentation set up. I will go as quickly as I can here. Great. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, we are.
Great. Let's see if we can advance it. So how about that? All right. So I'm going to just briefly talk about 3 updates that are happening in our Environmental Services Division. I want to talk about our enforcement response plan and significant industrial user policy updates that we're proposing. And so this is our pre-treatment program that supports all of the partners. I'm going to talk about, just give you an update of where we are with our Laguna Environmental Laboratory as we're marching towards the T&I standards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then just share a little bit of data, if there's time, on our wastewater epidemiological testing that we've been doing here. So our enforcement response plan is a general enforcement response plan that covers all wastewater users. It's mandatory for the EPA approved pretreatment program that we are all a part of, and includes pretreatment staff responsibilities, administrative enforcement tools and guidelines, and then it has ranges for the fines for industrial user non-compliance. The current version that we're operating under was approved in 2010 and needed some updates. And it's referenced and supported by all of the regional partners' municipal codes. And it establishes an enforcement procedural uniformity throughout the regional system. So your codes just point to this emergency response plan. There's no need to change your codes as we update this. So the overall changes are relatively minor. We've changed staff titles and enforcement responsibilities. They were updated. We included hauled waste as one of the options for industrial users. And then we updated our department name. We used to be called the Utilities Department. Now we're Santa Rosa Water. So we updated that. We're also updating the significant industrial user enforcement response plan. This sits within the enforcement response plan, but is specific to the significant industrial user. These are policies for the users, and we meet that meet the EPA definition of an SIU. I won't go into that right now, what that is for time. But it defines user actions that result in non-compliance. So it prescribes what they are. So it's clear when somebody's in non-compliance, provides a structure for escalation of SIU non-compliance enforcement, and outlines fine structures for the administrative and reporting violations. And our current policy was also approved in 2010. So we wanted to update that as well. The changes to the SIU policy are the definition of a significant non-compliance has changed just to replicate the language used in EPA regulations. It doesn't really have significant changes to our program, but it allows it to match and mirror the EPA regs. And it's updated acceptable user discharge pH to match our city code. So that was one difference there. Second thing I wanted to talk about is our Laguna Environmental Lab. Just give you a little bit of an update. It was established in 1968, expanded to add a broader scope of analytical testing in 2000. We have 13 staff who work in our lab, and it operates 7 days per week. Those 13 staff aren't all there every day, obviously, but we spread it out so that we can provide analytical results every day as necessary for our wastewater treatment operations and other operations. And then last fiscal year, we've processed over 19,108 different samples. The big change right now that we're dealing with is maintaining our accreditation. I spoke about this at a previous subtac meeting. We are accredited through the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program known as ELAP. This is the accreditation body for environmental laboratories in California. It's housed in the State Water Resources Control Board. They adopted the NELAC Institute standards with laboratories, and that we all needed to adopt these new regulations by January 2024, and that it updates the updates to the city program are focused with the quality assurance program. There are some on the analytical side as well, but most of it is our quality assurance program. And this is our timeline. I'm not going to go into all the details. You'll have access to these slides afterwards, but this is just showing you that we are on target for meeting these requirements. And there's a number of milestones depicted here. The other thing I just wanted to update is in the last 2 years, because our advanced instrumentation lab is about 22 years old, a lot of those instruments have aged out because they were all purchased at the same time. So this is just a list of the major instruments that we have changed in the last 2 years. And the way we budgeted for this was a little bit each year so that it didn't come as a big hit when they all needed to be replaced. So this represents quite an investment in our laboratory. Then I just want to briefly kind of go over the epidemiological studies that we're working on right now. We've been working with 2 different entities. BioBot is one. We send them samples and they run the analyses looking at COVID. I'll share you a graph with that. But we also started working with Verily, who's actually paying us to send them samples. And they're looking at COVID, monkeypox, influenza A, and respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. So this is what we're getting from BioBot. We send them a couple samples a week, and they're providing this data for us. And you can just see, not going over the axes here, it's more of a relative abundance. You can see we're looking like we're in an increasing level of COVID in our area. So I think we're probably experiencing that in our work groups as well. I know that I am in my work group, and our department is as well. So it's coming around the corner here. And then this is the data. The numbers, don't pay attention to the numbers. This is a relative abundance based on its relationship to another common virus. And this allows this data, this is what we're getting from Verily, this allows this data to be comparative to other entities across the country, regardless of the type of waste water that they have coming in. So if you have a higher industrial amount coming in, you should have a lower amount of this other virus. Therefore, they could look at comparing, normalizing our data to a facility like those. We're also looking at monkeypox. We've had a number of spikes of monkeypox in our testing, but it seems to be somewhat episodic, and following a national trend is starting to decrease in abundance in our wastewater. As you can see, our last 5 samples have come in at 0. The respiratory syncytial virus, I'm not going to give you the influenza A graph because we haven't really detected any. There was one sample that did detect it, and looking at the data across, it seems like everybody had a high sample on that same date. So I think there was a sampling error or an analysis error that hasn't been corrected. So I'm not sharing any data because it's just a flat line. But this is the RSV, and this is a common. You experience a common cold symptoms with this, but it is can cause pneumonia in infants and is very common. So we also might have staff who are out with symptoms, but aren't testing negative. And it seems like this might be what they've got, possibly. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions or comments from SubTAC members? Yes, Ryan.
Hey, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I always appreciate these.
Sure.
I'm curious about what are the city's, I guess, plans forward for sort of some of the emerging contaminants we're seeing, like PFOS and PFAS, and what are our capabilities for tracking that? Are we off other labs, or are we kind of, I'd like to get your comment on that.
Sure. So we participated in the state board order, which required us to provide samples from our wastewater. I believe maybe it was 2 SubTAC meetings ago, I presented on that data. We are getting some follow-up with our regional board as they're looking at the data that we provided them. We looked at our influent, effluent, biosolids, and we also have well monitoring in both a recycled water area. We monitored those wells, and well monitoring in a biosolids application site. So we're looking at that. We are also looking, as Deputy Director Mike Prinz spoke today about the work going on in South County. We're joining a research effort that is a national research effort with Dr. Lee, looking at the effect of biosolids, and she's going to be taking samples from our wells and our soils to look at the fate of PFAS. And instead of looking at just the 31 PFAS compounds that were in the general order and that we have ELAP certified or EPA certified methods to analyze, she's going to be looking at hundreds of different PFAS compounds and precursors to look at the fate there. And so we'll be participating in that study. And obviously, it does seem to be an area of emerging concern with the PFAS, because they don't seem to go away. And we're looking at, or have already looked at, one of the wastewater coming from the leachate from the landfill, and they have elevated levels of PFAS in there. But those are going to be different than what we might get from a lot of residential. It does seem to, early indications are showing that no matter how much industry you have, the PFAS levels are relatively consistent throughout. Like, industry doesn't spike your amount of PFAS levels. So it does seem to be primarily a residential source, and we will be looking at how we might do a pre-treatment approach.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from SubTAC members?
No,
All right.
thanks for the presentation.
Great. Seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment. If you'd like to make public comment on item 5.4, please raise your hand on Zoom, or if you're on the phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments on this item.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much, Sean, for your presentation. And we will quickly go to our very last item. Our very last item is our proposed schedule for next year's SubTAC meetings. So before you have our proposed meetings to occur in on February 9th, March 9th, April 6th, which is typically our first Thursday of the month meeting for budget purposes, and then October 12th. At this time, based on new legislation, we're anticipating that we will likely be meeting in person. But if things change, we can always make a finding to meet virtually, as I believe AB 361 will still be in effect concurrently with the new legislation. So with that, any questions or comments from the subtac on the proposed meeting schedule?
Sounds good.
Yes, Craig.
Can you quickly put the schedule on my screen? The links in the agenda aren't working for me. Sorry.
Think I can. We will see how this
Yes, thank you.
goes. Oh, thank you, Dina. So,
Okay.
does that work?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments from subtac on this item? And we'll make sure and send out the schedule to you all. So seeing no other questions or comments, we'll now open it up for public comment on item 5.5. Wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. And if you are on the phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much, subtac members. Apologies if this meeting went a little long. We will adjourn the meeting at 9:37 today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Oh, Craig,
Thank
did you
you.
have a question?
Yeah, sorry. It's a really good opportunity. We're gonna dig up West Sierra Avenue to put up in a new sewer here in November and December. And so that's just an FYI. It's part of our INI reduction program.
Great.
Just
Very
quickly.
cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Craig.
Okay.
Thank you all. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye.